This is something which we've talked about before. I can remember introducing about natural chemicals within foods on the update a couple of years ago as things of significance, particularly to people who got sort of unusual sort of symptoms and things. But I never realized just how important these things are if you've got a sensitivity towards these. So these are naturally occurring chemicals within the foods that we eat. So they're not toxic substances that are added, like pesticides, herbicides, and so on. These are actual chemicals. So they're not allergies. Okay, so leaving aside the immunoglobulin true allergic reaction, these are chemicals which are naturally present. And there's a saying which is so very, very true, and that's one man's meat is another man's poison. And directly you say that to people, they say, now I understand, because my husband can eat this, but I can't, and so on. And, you know, what is it? Why is it? And when we go through these things, you'll begin to see that basically most of us are eating ourselves into disease. Not so much of even deficiencies in diseases, not even so much as environmental, chemicals in it, but actually chemicals within the food. Because a lot of the foods that we're eating are not normal types of foods. Our diets have changed enormously over the last 100, 150 years. Things were simpler in the olden days. One of the things I like in listening to Jeff Bland's recordings, going back, he interviewed one guy who was talking about Victorian medicine in the second part of the 1800s, from 1850 onwards, how good actually medicine was and how good the health in the country was. And yet it's got a bad name that all Victorian was terrible and hygiene and everything was terrible. But the medical records were actually very positive, and the average calorie intake was between 5,000 and 7,000 calories. Yeah, it's enormous input, isn't it? Because everybody worked manually. They were all manually working. And it was normal to eat between 10 and 12 fruit and veg a day. But the interesting thing is, we probably wouldn't eat those vegetables or fruits, he said these days, because they would be terribly bitter. And these bitter polyphenolic compounds are what actually protected the food from insects and pests biting them. So they were there to stop. They didn't need insecticides because the bug wouldn't get into that fruit because it tasted awful. Okay? But gradually what we've done through selective, we could call it engineering, but selection, natural selection we call it, is we've made foods less bitter, which has increased the sweet. So if you've ever tasted sweet corn, which is grown for cattle, but if you have sweet corn for human consumption, it's very sweet, isn't it? So they've taken out a lot of the bitter compounds, and therefore the sweeter compounds are much more attractive. But they're also attractive now to the bugs. So there's actually less protective elements. And you wonder, a lot of processed foods now are highly concentrated. You think of the number of people who have smoothies, and vegetable drinks, high protein drinks, things where they're putting, spoonfuls of this powder. Okay? Now, what is that powder? It's always got, 10 pounds of kale in it. Really? 10 pounds of liquid of kale. You wouldn't eat 10 pounds of kale. If you extract the water out, you might get a couple of spoonfuls of it, you see, and they put that happily into their smoothie. And what you're doing is you're taking in a low concentration of a lot of other, perhaps, natural substances, but are much, much more concentrated than what they ever were before. So we built up, or I built up over the years, a sort of dossier of these, and then really sometimes I test these with patients, but more recently, because of the autoimmune problems, and looking to try and find out what it is that's going on with the immune system, we've realized that it's not just up-regulating, it's down-regulating certain immune system by poisoning. And literally, we are poisoning ourselves, or a lot of us, with chronic illnesses. And the first one, and possibly the most common one, is isothiocyanates. Now, I'm just going to change the production here, I'm afraid. I'm going to come back to it because I've modified it slightly. So the first one, isothiocyanates. Iso means the same. Iso usually is two molecules, mirrored image. Thio means sulfur, and cyanate means cyanide. Okay, so the common things with this is the thio is the sulfur. So this is why they're introduced into people who need sulfur. Sulforaphanes are derivatives of this, and the cyanide part is something that kills particularly cancer cells. So there's a lot of interest in taking cyanide in natural forms because cancer cells have an affinity for it. Cancer cells take it up, which is why if you potentially have got cancer or could get cancer and things, a diet high in cruciferous vegetables is good, basically. But in some people it's not. So cruciferous vegetables traditionally are broccoli, cabbage, and cauliflower, and Brussels sprouts. I wonder when we leave the EU whether we're going to change that to London sprouts, or why it's Brussels sprouts, or whether it's going to just change to sprouts. So sprouts, broccoli, cabbage, and cauliflower. These are the traditional ones. But there are other ones which have crept into the diet more, again, because we're told these are good for us. And this is kale and spinach. So these are all good things, aren't they? Normally they're nice green leafy vegetables, good for you. They help protect. They're full of sulforaphanes. And there's a few other substances, foods that you might include here in some people is watercress. Not a thing people have a lot of, but sometimes people have a lot of watercress soup and that sort of thing. Pak choi, that's grown in popularity, hasn't it, over the last 5-6 years. And one that shocked me was globe artichoke. And I love globe artichokes. And I had no idea that they were rich in isothiocyanates. And we had a patient last week, who showed to egg. Now these are all plant ones, but she was highly sensitive to isothiocyanates, and what came up was egg, and when we cross-checked the egg to the isothiocyanates, there it was. Now whether it's the chicken eats these somehow and gets it into the system, I don't know. What we do know is the antidote to it is taurine. So taurine is a sulfur-bearing amino acid that I talked about earlier. We use a taurine SA, which means succinic acid, because it gets across the blood-brain barrier much better. And some of the neurological problems and serious problems that I found with this is Parkinson's disease. So if you know anything about Parkinson's on previous, we know it's a mitochondrial disease, and it's one specific place on the mitochondrial DNA, which is for complex 4 in the mitochondria, and that is exactly where it's poisoned by cyanide. And then you get a build-up of reactive oxygen species. So they are highly sensitive to isothiocyanate foods. And when you ask people this, they say, oh yes, I eat that all the time. And so really what you're doing is you're having a slow dose of poison every day, which may be one of the reasons why so many of these problems that we talked about today, go progressively on rather than clearing up. Horseradish is something which most people don't have unless they're having a bit of roast beef and things. Garden cress, mustard greens, I think this really refers to mustard and cress again, a little bit silver season and things. But I find that 20% of the population have this. If I take 20% of the people here in this room, the chances are 1 in 5 people will show positive to it. So I'm going to go through these first of all, and then we're going to have some fun and test a few people. Okay? So solanine. Solanine is deadly nightshade. Okay, this everybody knows that deadly nightshade is deadly because it paralyzes the muscarinic receptors. So basically your pupils dilate and so on. So what happens is that you get acetylcholine deficiency. And the main source of this is potatoes, specifically if they're green, but not always. The green is actually not alpha-solanine, it's actually chlorophyll, which means the potato's been exposed to the light between digging them up and you getting them. But it's in that green. But potatoes do contain solanine, even if they're new. But there is another chesonane, which is another chemical in potatoes, because sometimes people are sensitive to potatoes, but not to the rest of the solanine family. The other members here, tomatoes, which I'm going to talk about because that's an individual problem on its own. Green peppers, it doesn't seem to be red peppers. or orange or yellow. Aubergines, otherwise known as eggplants. Tobacco, that's chewing tobacco really. Paprika, goji berries. Goji berries are quite popular, aren't they? Goji berries are become more and more. See how some of these things have crept in. Ashwagandha, and ashwagandha, as we'll see a little later, is actually very good for some people, but in this case, it's high in solanines. And this is one I find is motor neurone disease. So put this down, motor neurone disease. If you've got any cases of NMD, motor neurone disease, the antidote to this at the moment that we've found the best one is thyme. Thymus vulgaris, or thyme as an organic compound, tends to help to get rid of this. We have used lemon balm, but thyme seems to be slightly better than lemon balm. But this is in about 15% of the population. So about 15% of the population show to solanines. So this is not something which is just one occasionally. This is a lot of people. So now we've got 20. We've got 35% of the population. 1/3 of the population show to these. And of course, you could be unlucky and show to 2 or 3 of them. You haven't necessarily just got to have one. Depends on what the person's eating. So the following foods contain solanine, but are not part of the nightshade family. Blueberries. So blueberries are, and a lot of people eat blueberries now. And so actually, I don't feel very good after them because they're paralyzing their acetylcholine receptor. Some of the other things I've never come across myself. Huckleberries are really myrtles, which are wild blueberries, really. But we don't have those. Artichokes, I'm not sure they're, I guess it's the Jerusalem artichoke there because of the root crop rather than globe artichoke. And ascorbate palmitate. Ascorbate palmitate is put into a lot of supplements. Have you noticed how many, not our company, I might add, but how many companies do put ascorbate palmitate? And it's made from potatoes. Okay, and people don't realize that. So if you're solanine toxin and you say, I take supplements with ascorbate palmitate, which is sold as a fat-soluble form of vitamin C. It's not. It's an excuse for putting in stearates, really. So beware of any product which contains ascorbate palmitate. And yeast. Most yeast contains potato. So little sort of hidden things which might creep into the system. So solanine is very common. Tyramine. 10% of the population, roughly. Tyramine, as I said, aging foods. Bananas, avocados being the prime ones, chocolate and cheese. So, and therefore, we've got a few other things in there. Sour cream, things which are going off. Pickled herrings, liver, salami. Broad bean pods, we don't really eat, but that was one of the first things they found with monoamine oxidase inhibiting drugs. Fermented things like yogurts and sauerkraut. Maybe in really bad cases, yeast extracts, which could include beer and wine because they're fermented. Bovril, Oxo, and Marmite, MSG, and also all fermented soya bean products, which is what most soya products are fermented. Okay, so it could be quite extensive, but normally when people weaken to tyramine, it's not. It's the avocados and bananas, cheese, chocolate, and then maybe, if they have a bit of yogurt and sauerkraut. And, we did have one person that we tested last week whose sole source of it was red wine. And she was not amused. Cheese, no problem whatsoever. And when I discovered she didn't really eat very much, but she liked red wine. So that's tyramine. Tyramine, AD, is Alzheimer's disease. Okay, what tyramine does, as I say, is it blocks the monoamine oxidase pathway, or it uses it up, so you can't metabolize serotonin, noradrenaline, and dopamine. So basically, you're on high alert all the time. You're go, 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 so there's risk of hypertension. These people run high noradrenaline. They're anxious, they're nervous, they've got all the signs of, if they haven't got hypertension, they're just running, usually it's the heart meridian or the governor vessel, which is high noradrenaline. Salamis. Some salamis are 2, 3, 4 years old. That's old. When you start getting that, they're full of tyramine. And, this is a very common sort of diet in the Mediterranean. So, antidote there, rosemary. Okay? That's not the girl. That is the herb. And again, rosemary, excellent herb as a powder. Don't try and use it so effectively just as a herb. It's nice on roast lamb and that sort of thing. But really, the needles are not absorbable. So you need to actually have it squashed up, ground up finely. And of course, like all these things, they need to be organic. So we do a nice rosemary there. Purine foods, probably more familiar with these. These are the things that go on to form uric acid, and therefore you've got the sensitivity to a possibility of gout. So this would be red meats, anything that contains a lot of purines. Rich things like game, meat extracts, again, bovril, oxo, gravies. It's also a trade name. Bovril, I suppose I shouldn't put those down, really, should you? Brains. Not many people eat those anymore, not since mad cow disease. Kidneys, liver, heart. People don't really eat these anymore, do they? Used to, but they're missing out on a lot of good things unless you've got gout, of course. Sweetbreads. There seems to be controversy as to what sweetbreads are. I was always told they were pancreas, but some people say that you say they're thyroids. You said they're testicles. Any rare advances on that? Ovaries, anyway? Thyroids. I don't know, maybe it's a collective word, sweetbreads, for a mixture of different hormonal glands. Shellfish, purine foods because they're concentrated, mussels, oyster. Anchovies. I often tell the story about when Jeff Bland was on the Carson, what's he called, somebody Carson show in America years ago, and Colonel Sanders was on with Jeff Bland. And Jeff Bland turned around in the end to Colonel Sanders. He said, "You don't eat that stuff, do you?" And he said, "I don't go near it myself." He was 93 or something at this age. And he produced a pot of anchovies. He said, "That's what I eat every day." He said, anchovies. And it's very rich, of course, in purine foods. It was DNA and RNA to help the body regenerate. But if you've got a problem with gout, you don't want to eat too many anchovies because they're really concentrated on that. Herrings, mackerel, sardines, peas, beans, alcohol. Again, it's more the fortified ones. Traditionally it's port and sherry and things, which people years ago used to drink much more of. People don't seem to drink port and sherry really these days, do they? Used to have that when you went down for lunch with your parents and that sort of thing, wasn't it? A glass of sherry before dinner. Right, this one is much more common, possibly is salicylate foods. This is, salicylate is a type, aspirin is a type of salicylate. So this would therefore be in cold and flu remedies. Medicines used for pain, for headaches, periods, sinuses, problems. Some antacids contain salicylates, basically to kill off the pain. Gastric sort of formulas. You've got pain in your gut, and they slip a bit of aspirin in there, and it helps. Oh, this is good. Things like again, I have to be careful with the name. B powders for flus and colds. Okay, drugs used for inflammatory bowel disease. Many complementary and alternative medicines have salicylates in them. Maybe not, as you would know them, but white willow extracts and so on. And then many complementary, especially those used for pain. And this was an interesting one in a case we had, teething gels. Teething gels. And when you ask whether the person who has the problem ever had teething gels, and of course they probably don't know, but if their mum's around, they say, "Oh yes, I used to rub it on." And you wonder, if you rub teething gels on a baby, do they become sensitive to the salicylates? If you're rubbing, a synthetic chemical or a chemical, even a natural one, onto the teeth, onto the gums to help that, in very young age, 4 or 5 months, are you sensitizing that person to salicylates? Do you want to talk about your crab? No, not really. Okay. All right. It's just that Jill, I know, is very sensitive to aspirin. You reacted as a child to aspirin. And then years and years later, you had a soft shell crab, and she reacted badly to that. And that is high in salicylates. Most people wouldn't eat soft shell. I don't know whether ordinary crab has it as well, but sometimes it's interesting how one thing can spark it off with the same biochemical pathway, which you may not be aware of. Did you have teething gel used a lot? I wonder. Yes. See. Foods containing high levels include tea, with the exception of fruit teas, coffee, dried herbs. For some reason, drying herbs increases the salicylates there. Spices, peppers. And this was an interesting, sharp green apples and bananas. You know, there's a craving for something that's sharp there. Bananas. And then you've got some fruits like cherries. Most people don't really eat cherries out of season very much. Strawberries. Well, strawberries are a really waste of time, aren't they, when they're not in season, you know, to eating. But people do persist. Dried fruits. Tomatoes, again, I'm going to come back to because this is an issue on its own. Fresh, pureed, and ketchup. Fruit juices, cider, wine, peppermints, licorice. And again, I had one case where broccoli came up on this. So there's a little crossing over. Broccoli we see in 2 or 3 things. Could be, you know, a chance. Because broccoli is not a natural plant, is it? It's a hybrid between cabbage and calabrese. So it's not not a genetically modified synthetically, but by natural selection. MSG, monosodium glutamate. I put on the top one just to remind us, celery. Okay, remember this is a natural source of it. MSG, of course, is a natural compound. It was, you know, extracted from seaweed extract originally, and then they found it gave a particular flavour called a Yamani taste, which is like a salty but more attractive even than salt. So they add it, therefore, to lots of sort of sauces like Chinese, soya sauces. It can be hidden as a natural flavour if it's less than a certain percentage there. So there's lots of sort of different soups, different crisps, you know, anything basically in a packet or a tin or a can could have it in it. Fish extracts are made from decomposed fish proteins, and these are often in a lot of sushi foods and Far Eastern sort of foods. Fish sauce, of course. Sausages, most supermarkets add MSG. Processed cheese spreads, anything which is Marmite. Good heavens. And then bouillon, instant soup mixes, you know, anything in a packet really, isn't it? And then final sheet here, Worcester sauce. You know, we use these things almost routinely, and it's not a problem to most people, but it can be a problem to some people. Bodybuilding protein drinks, Parmesan cheese. It's even slipped into many things. In America, they slip it apparently into the fries, into the French fries, that even the French fries taste of monosodium glutamate. Instead of ordinary salt, they put MSG, and it makes them more addictive. So you want another lot after that because they're so nice. Okay, histamine foods. Some foods do contain histamine naturally. Prickly pear, we probably don't really have very much. Stinging nettle, of course, that's what the histamine response is. Cabbage. Milk thistle is a herb for detoxifying. Some people use. She has a surname, melon. So foods, cabbage, melon, sunflower, bass, that's the seed, not the drink. Beer, chicken, cocoa, chocolate, cod, crab, haddock, ham, lobster, milk, cow's milk. Let's come off the bottom of the... we've got mutton, oysters, salmon, scallops, shrimps, trout, tuna, turkey, and yeast. So there are some people who are naturally sensitive. Mackerel we can put in there, yeah. All those sort of things, I think, build the dossier up each time. So oxalates, oxalates are things which create calcium oxalate depositions. So these can be damaging to kidneys, and they can irritate bladders. A lot of interstitial cystitis, it's called, where there's no bug in the urine, but they get terrible pain, like a cystitis. So very high is avocados, dates, grapefruits, etc. Just work our way through. Many of these are the same things coming round and round again, aren't they? And then very high also avocado date. That looks like the same list to me. High is tangerines, figs, prunes, celery's coming up again there, collards and so on. What kind of carrot juice there? Raw carrots. Yeah, very similar, the high and the... Okay, caffeine. Caffeine creeps in as a natural substance. It's obviously a stimulant. It's in certain percentages even in decaffeinated Decaffeinated coffee is never 100%. It's 97%, but somebody who's very sensitive to caffeine. Less so in tea, soda, energy drinks. Anything which is an energy drink, to help you down the gym is usually laced with caffeine there. Chocolate's got it in, hot chocolate, frozen yogurts, caffeine-fortified foods, protein bars. There's so many people eat protein bars, don't they? They really, they, I go to the gym every day, but I have a protein bar before I go. Give me the energy there. Fancy flavoured waters. So there's lots of fancy flavoured waters around, which are often laced with caffeine. That's why, it gives you a kick. Alcohol-flavoured energy drinks. These would be your old Alco Pops, which I think are not quite so popular these days. Pain relievers, weight loss pills, breath fresheners, caffeinated mints, some instant oatmeal. Again, the antidote there seems to be time. Now, this is an interesting one as well. This is a new one to me in the collection, is betaine foods. Betaine is a naturally occurring vitamin B. So it's a compound. Is that in yours? No. Okay, you might want to add this one there. Oh, I can't. Oh, no, that's right, because this is an extra. So I've added this one, betaine. Betaine is a vitamin B, but it's not an essential vitamin B. So it means you can get it, you can make it in the system, usually in the liver. But it is a vitamin B. It is essential for the system because it's a methyl donor. But it can be a problem with some people. It traditionally came from beets, hence the name betaine. It comes from beetroot. And a lot of people are very sensitive to beetroot. Beetroot is fantastic for many, many things. It helps regeneration, helps rebuild DNA. It's a great detoxifier. It's a great methylator for people with methylation problems. But it's also deadly for some people. It causes rashes and all sorts of things. So it's also a wheat germ, it's quinoa, spinach, rye, kamut wheat, bulgur wheat, sweet potatoes. That's the first time sweet potatoes has shown up to have any issues. Otherwise, sweet potatoes are pretty good. Veal, onions, and mushrooms. Another one I found, which is occasionally comes up with people, is cysteine foods. Cysteine, we know, can go on again to cause kidney stones, renal calculi with people. And cysteine is a sulfur-bearing amino acid, which should then be metabolized on when it's got too much into glutathione. So meats, including eggs, of course, are very high in this sulfur. Plants, red peppers, garlic, onions, broccoli, Brussels sprouts. You see there's that broccoli and Brussels sprouts coming in again, wheat germ, and spinach. So broccoli, Brussels sprouts, spinach, keep coming round and round and round. Cysteine food. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that. Is that yours? I think that was your... You got yours? Okay. I think that's probably it. Oh, no. Yes, no. Oh, the last one there. Do you want to go back? Cysteine. Have another moment with cysteine. So you'll see the common denominator with all these is sulfur. So some people have problems with sulfur foods, although sulfur, on the other hand, is very good with other people. So just finishing out that, we'll leave that one. And the last one I think there here is malonaldehyde, which is a marker that's used for lipid peroxidation. So this is a naturally occurring aldehyde or aldehyde compound within oils. So this, of course, is your rancid fats. And the most rancid fats that we find is olive by a long shot, rapeseed oil, flax oil. Flax is, even organic flax is very delicate oil, and again, very easily goes rancid when exposed to light and heat. So we have to be very careful, with ours. We buy it, we test everything, we float nitrogen over it so oxygen can't get into it. Olive, I wouldn't even touch olive unless you muscle tested the olive, because you're going to be horrified if you're an olive oil drinker or you put olive oil on your salads and you make things with olive oil. For Pete's sake, test it, because we find 50%, and that was half the population, are rancid. So when you add, I haven't put percentages on some of the other ones because I'm still working on those, but if you put those all together, it probably includes most of the population, but most of the population have got problems. How many calibrate at 100% in their health when you do it? Even if you're 95, it means there's something between the phenotype and the genotype, which is an epigenetic factor. And the biggest variation in most people is what they eat. Well, variation being not the word really, because they don't vary it. That's one of the problems, is we don't have a broad enough, selection. We need to eat a more varied type of diet. But these are all involved with trying to get the system and get them out if you're eating these things. And that's why you need greater amounts of nutrients which stimulate the detoxification pathway, because these set up inflammation. So in this case, you need greater amounts of your good oils. The only way to get rid of a bad oil is to increase your good oils. Flood the body with good quality oils, particularly the same sort of type. Yarrow is a great antidote for many chemicals, and in this case, malondialdehyde.